association is my association is the person is about to speak something that's going to be hard to say in the group.
Yeah. All right, that's a good transition to our topic of the day. Last time we talked about empathy on the abyss of difference. And it wasn't all that hard to talk about empathy, but I think we're headed to the abyss today with the topic that we decided to discuss, which is the transgender issue. It's so charged, individually and families, politically, medically, religiously. And I've gone to other meetings, but there's always someone in the room who is transgender, and it makes it easy to empathize with them, but also hard to challenge. I think we come from different perspectives, and somebody else start. I just had a very intense conversation with someone from Iran, which was absolutely marvelous, but I'm still recovering from that. So somebody else start.
The word of the abyss actually kind of provides a resonance for me because of listening in on the presentation from the committee on gender and sexuality, the APSA committee meeting a couple of weeks ago. And this word, I guess, kind of identifies the experience of witnessing that, because it is as if visiting a community in an abyss.
Mm.
Because it was of people who were either transgender or very much identified one way or the other with the experience, transgender experience. And so this was an unusual opportunity to do that. It was not just being in the presence of somebody who's transgender, but really kind of immersing in the experience of this community that is so that's living it.
Well, I didn't attend that session, but I guess I'm wondering maybe if a place to start on this topic would be to get a definition of what is transgender, what is meant by that.
I guess to me, I don't know whether that's I imagine, I assume that this was a common definition, that transgender meant having a sense of gender identity that is at odds with the gender assigned at birth and identified by sexual organs and sexual organ functioning. That's my sense, as opposed to cisgender, which means being on the same side as the gender assigned at birth. Does everybody feel the same way? Katrina, you have a different sense about it?
Well, I've heard that definition before, certainly, but none of it is coherent. None of it makes sense. I mean, hearing that begs the question, okay, well, what is gender identity then?
So again, perhaps drawing on that experience of being in that session, this was the closest I've ever come to kind of maintaining a presence, maintaining communion with somebody, experiencing it. So my sense, I mean, one of the people he was a transgender man who was describing from the time he was a little boy, I think he was taking it to the age of 2, thinking of himself as a boy, despite the gender at birth being a female.
Yeah, not wanting to go to a party with a dress on. I was at that meeting too. I think it was the one where he described um, ref refusing to go to a party because his mother wanted to put a dress on him at 2.
Um, I guess my question is, where are we wanting to go with this conversation?
I think looking at our differences in perspective, which I feel are present in this room, hard to articulate, but I mean, I know for myself, you know, I've had a few phone calls, one in particular, I remember a voicemail from a mother who asked if I would see her child, and she referred to the child as they. And I said my practice was full, which it is, but it would have been full if it wasn't, because I just feel too uncomfortable seeing a child who's already identified by their parents as non-binary, because it's just, it seems to me that it would take too long, and we don't even have the theory or to really understand how gender is embodied and expressed, and to imagine a person's lifetime, not just a child in that moment, but what the assumption of being not what your body says you are is going to do to their bodies, their psyche, their families, their childbearing, rearing. Um, I am not the person I was when I was 2 or 12 or 22. Um, so it just seemed like too much to take on. Even though I'd be fascinated by working with a person like that, I don't feel competent. So I don't know. That's
Yeah, I mean, I agree with a lot of your thoughts right now, Alice. And yeah, I am glad to look at the differences between us on this topic. I already have the sense, because this has been true for me in other contexts, that I'm probably going to be the voice of opposition, or I don't know how else to put it.
Katrina, you're the bravest.
Thank you, Michelle. Yeah, I mean, I think that there's brave, and then there's, I don't know, argumentative, right? Or, and it's not my goal to be argumentative, but kind of already, something you said, Alice, in one of your posts on APSA, and I haven't really been active or participating there. I think it was something like that the people who believe that God made 2 sexes, made them male and female, that those people should be able to have a voice too and be respected and not be, painted with the brush of, you're just hateful or phobic or whatever. So yeah, I guess in a nutshell, I would put myself into that category. God made them male or female, right? And the people cannot change between the two. And I mean, yeah, in a nutshell, that's kind of my core position, my foundation. I mean, I'm glad to talk more about this and hear from others, but. That's where I've landed.
I feel that I don't know enough to take a side. I mean, I understand the religious piece of it. That makes it very clear and probably easier for you. Um, and I am a religious person. Um, I just finished reading a book. I have different, like I don't know enough. So I have a half formed or maybe an eighth of a formed opinion or even less about the subject. I know when we started, my anxiety started rising. This is really, we're going to talk about this. Um, and hopefully we can. I just finished reading a book called Cis White Gay, written by Ben Appel, which was very eye-opening to me about how much I don't know about this whole topic and how poorly informed I am to even be part of a discussion about it. And all I know is it's fraught, it's politicized, um, there's our misunderstandings and people hurt. It certainly hurt the gay community after reading that book. Um, this is a powder keg for good reason.
It hurt the gay community.
According to him, he was a gay man. Very interesting book. He was raised in a cult, in a Christian cult, and he was gay, and so he was condemned for being gay. Then he went to public school. His parents' marriage broke up. He went to public school, and he was mercilessly teased for being gay in junior high school. And then he eventually he dropped out of college because he had a drug problem and he had OCD. Um, and then he eventually got clean. He went to AA. He met people in the gay community that were very supportive of him. He started being a hairdresser. I don't know what the term is, but he said, when you're in that kind of work, you're talking to all kinds of people from all walks of life. And he really learned a lot from being in the world. Well, then I think in his early 30s, and he married a man and he's very happy. He wanted to be normal. That's what he wanted to be. And he talked about how uncomfortable it was and how if it was in today's day and age, he would probably be encouraged to transition and would want to transition because it was so painful to feel not, identifying as a heterosexual, well, boy, whatever you want to call it at that point. So eventually he goes to Columbia and he talks about everything. And all of these difficult topics come together in this book. It's a brilliant piece of writing. He's a very talented man. I learned a lot. I don't know the other side, but I don't think we're exposed to all the different facets of this very complicated topic. So it's hard to talk about it because we don't know so much.
I'll just say right now, um, I think that having a open, being able to have empathy and trying to understand scientifically and psychologically and with acceptance someone else's experience, especially someone who's been very marginalized and really had no place at any table until 20 years ago or something. I mean, if that, it's still very new. But to validate that experience and understand and try to understand. But I think by definition, shouldn't such a tent or a table or a discussion also have enough space for people to say, I don't understand. Like, um, not just I don't understand, but even, well, I disagree. Even and going further than being, well, I don't understand. Could you explain to me? I think that's mostly allowed. Although even that is kind of like, well, educate yourself. We don't have, there's an aggression, there's a hostility to the whole framework of the discussion so often. Just being confused is considered an aggression sometimes, and then even allowing for uh, you know what I'm going to say, like, allowing for people even to be more than confused or not understanding, but to uh, push back various ways, religiously, biologically, psychiatrically, psychoanalytically, and if you cut off all the people who think that way, then you've created an artificial world that's not in reality, that we're pretending is reality, where everyone agrees about everything. That's all. Like, for example, I'll say one thing. I listened to J.K. Rowling's pod. I mean, she's a very radioactive name to bring up here right now.
Mhm.
And I'm very aware of who might be watching this, and they're going to say, "Oh, agrees with J.K. Rowling, and she's the worst," But it's not that I agree with J.K. Rowling, but I heard a long podcast, like multiple episode podcast, about what happened with her uh, regards to the transgender topics, and I could understand her perspective, and I didn't think her perspective sounded like someone out and out trying to be cruel and hateful and you know homophobic. It sounded to me like a woman with a strong reason for why she felt the way she did that made sense. And it sounds like, I mean, they really she's been she's kind of like so big and powerful. She's like too big to fall, kind of, but most people are not like that.
Think from my perspective, and this is probably just a trait of mine, I tend to want to see another person from their own point of view. So if someone tells me something about themselves, um, in my younger years, I may have even gone overboard with this, and it made me gullible to people uh, who had who could convince me of something from telling a story from their own point of view, and I'd be, oh, okay, yeah, that makes sense. I'll go with that. But I still think that that's still a perspective that I have, and I value it very, very highly now that I'm not so likely to just be gullible, probably. And so I think if someone has lived with this feeling of my identity is coming from inside me, not so much my physical parts, but my perspective of myself and my thoughts and feelings about myself, I take that very seriously. I think, well, they didn't just wake up one morning and decide this. It's real for them. And I happen to know a couple of folks who are transgender, and I think
What is it?
I buy their perspective on themselves.
I hear that part of it, Lynn, and I mean, I've thought about this quite a bit, that people do have all kinds of personal beliefs about themselves. Um, and really, I think at the end of the day, that's fine. People can have all kinds of beliefs, and ideas about themselves. I think one of the main things I object to is rearranging society around this very, kind of rare and esoteric, kind of belief system. For instance, I don't think we should have males in female spaces, such as, bathrooms, sports, prisons. I mean, all of those are becoming big issues.
I think I've been kind of consumed by just trying to understand why this is so triggering. While it's true that there's some very good examples of how it might be inappropriate for somebody who identifies as male to be in a female space, why the fairly limited number of these situations is so triggering. And listening to something recently, I was made aware of the first two sort of things that a child becomes aware of in binaries is big, small, and male and female. And just thinking for myself how easy it is to be in a binary position in all kinds of things, how difficult it is to hold nuance and complexity, that for people to see that there's a possible exception to a binary of male and female is really unsettling and really disturbing and really is it allows it to be mobilized in all kinds of ways that I think threatens a lot of our identities if we've come to see things as very binary. And that's the kind of place I start with this. Certainly there are people who are taking advantage of apparent transgender status, but there are way more people for whom it is an authentic experience of themselves, that it's not a binary experience, that it's a complex experience that doesn't fit into what we, for convenience in society, like to determine these are the places where people belong. And I think it's very difficult for any culture to deal with the complexity of that. And I think some of that reaction from our internal sense, I think is why it's so radioactive. And I sort of notice what my experience is with people that I know and work with who identify as non-binary or trans. And it's both unsettling and fascinating and interesting and complex. And it makes me realize in some ways how I like to identify myself in a very normalized, rigid way, and how difficult it would be to step out of that in all kinds of different ways. So I guess I'm just inviting people to sort of look at what the internal experience you have, what is the emotional experience you have around this, rather than looking at it as a social convention first. That's the secondary place. The first place is, what does it do to one's own self of identity when confronted with the possibility of someone who doesn't fit into the binary categories, and not to dismiss it as some perversion necessarily.
Well, I object to the word triggering. I mean, I'm not triggered. I just think it's untrue. A man cannot be a woman, and a man does not belong in a woman's space because it's not safe for the women and girls there. That's it. I mean, it strikes me as that's the reality. It doesn't really matter how I feel about it or how other people feel about it. It's some things are true and some are untrue.
What do you mean by true? Because it is also true that there are people who experience themselves in a transgender way. That is also true.
Well, again, I think we're back to so one of the people I follow on X around this, I mean, I follow a number of people, but he said at one point that in order for us to move forward and for society to move forward, that something like transgenderism should return to a private eccentricity rather than a public, something that should be publicly accommodated, right? It's a private eccentricity. So people do all kinds of things in the privacy of their homes. They have all kinds of beliefs that, affect their lives or should affect their lives only. You know, some people believe that they were abducted by aliens. I obviously eh, we're not rearranging society around that particular belief. That's just one example.
I mean, I understand the point around that. I mean, I guess, but you could say, well, we used to have separate bathrooms for Black folks. So the question is, to what degree does society need to shift for a small minority of folks so that they don't feel completely eliminated? I think that's the struggle. And again, why it's become so politically mobilized. I mean, for example, I don't know if you know the story of Riley Gaines, the woman
Mhm.
swimmer who lost fourth place to a trans person and has become a spokesperson, getting well supported to do that spokesperson role. And yet the coach of that team has also been accused by multiple women of rape and abuse, and was dismissed from that. So the fact that one of these things in that system of women athletes has become a celebrated cause, and yet something else that in some ways was much more directly damaging to the women has taken a second place to what people know about that story. And that seems really significant.
Well, I don't want to get derailed by false equivalences. You know, obviously race is different, and or you know, kind of I don't know what happened there. You know, with these sexual assault allegations. Personally, I don't want to get derailed by something like that. But I think and I don't want to kind of dominate the discussion when we make sure everybody has a chance to speak. But I think where this brings me at this point is what Luba referenced in the email, this most recent email, as we were preparing for the session, and I didn't have a chance to respond or engage, but the metaphysical aspect, right? And I think what we're experiencing, and maybe to your point, Jack, why this is such a charged issue, is I think this is ultimately a religious conflict. And the religious conflict is between the Judeo-Christian tradition, a kind of cultural Christianity that built this civilization we all live in, that built the West, essentially. Even people who identify as agnostic or atheist, they benefit. They're the cultural inheritors of Christendom, you know, and the value system that again allowed us to get to where we are and to have this civilization. So I think let's say that's side A, right? And side B is a sort of emerging neo-paganism. And I think transgenderism kind of falls right into that, along with other beliefs, you know, or other practices such as witchcraft, astrology. You know, there was a great book. It's called Pagan America by John Daniel Davidson. You know, he's Catholic, but he kind of delves into he kind of unpacks, you know, the Christianity versus a sort of again neo-paganism. So I think that's why. I think that's why it's so charged. It's not just the material reality on the ground. It's what is our sacred tradition? You know, what are our values? Are we going to hold Father, Son, Holy Spirit as sacred, or pronouns sacred?
Really struck by how far apart we are already on this discussion. I knew it would be
Yeah.
I knew we would be far apart, but hearing it is kind of different, you know, being in the quote room or virtual room. It's different. It makes me think of being with other groups of people that you know, I can theoretically disagree with them, but when I'm in the same room, it feels very differently to me, feels very different to me. And I love that. I mean, this is,
I am so thankful we are not an echo chamber.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you for saying that, Michelle. Yeah.
Another element of this is the fact that I think our leaps in medicine and technology has far surpassed our ability to understand each other and be with each other psychologically. So that I think it would be easier for me, maybe for us, to figure out ways to engage with people who see themselves as transgender if there wasn't this immediate question, should my child have hormones? Should I have this surgery or that surgery? I've known teenagers who, in my generation, they would get nose jobs. Now they get boobs removed at the same age. And, our society is becoming one where if you want to look this way and lose this amount of weight and, have a better brain, AI is over here for that, we can outsource our humanity and our physical appearance to medicine. And so talking with someone, I'm thinking in the office, who's struggling with being transgender, the question in the room is, do you go to a doctor? And I don't want to ask that question, but it's there. And I think it would be easier for us as psychoanalysts to figure out how to help people, be with people, integrate people, if they were just people and not medical experiments.
It feels like intervention at an early age is a much more problematic, complex topic. I mean, I have a colleague who's worked with someone who's slowly determined to do some interventions within a trans direction, who's worked with the person for 10 years, starting as a young person, as a very young person. So with that amount of time and ability of the child to develop, they're in a better position, I think, to make those kind of decisions. So I think separating out the reality of trans experience from when that decision can be made is also part of this conversation. It seems an important part. I also don't think we should totally idealize the Judeo-Christian tradition also, nor the psychoanalytic tradition in terms of its capacity to own up to its own ethics.
But Katrina really drew the cultural divides so effectively of the Christian mass, large percentage of this country who have traditional Christian beliefs and conviction of faith that it's true, and what is the government doing coming in trying to teach their own children that their children ought to be thinking about whether they're some other gender, or doesn't that make sense that a lot of people would really not like that? Um, um, and it would lead to a huge backlash, which has really been harmful
I think
to the very people we're trying to protect.
and I think that was the point. I think that this is the major issue, is a smokescreen for a lot more.
Mm-hmm.
We can't, we get caught up in this one issue. And I also feel that, there are people who are genuinely transgender. Those people are the real ones that are suffering. There are a lot of young people who have a lot of mental health problems that feel that that's the problem. There are unscrupulous clinicians out there and parents are so victimized, and everybody is so confused. But I do believe, and the other fact is that you can't really talk about it as a professional organization either. The whole politicization of the trans movement has made it impossible to really have the important nuanced discussions that, of course, we have to have. When you try, when you hear about conferences that get shut down for this reason or that reason, that is a problem. If you want to talk about free speech, the fact that we can't, as clinicians, as people in this field, talk about it is alarming. And I don't know that you can separate out the clinical from the political, since the political piece affects people psychologically as well. And, I'm pretty naive. I'm not that schooled in this area at all. But when I finished reading this book, I mean, there are people who have not had any surgical interventions who are using opposite bathrooms. It's not even that there's a delineation between, okay, somebody who's gotten to the point where they've had surgery and they've gotten to that point. I think that's a different situation in terms of the bathrooms and everything. And in the prisons, you have biological males. I mean, that's dangerous. And there have been documented problems. So I don't know how we can separate out the two. But I believe, and I will say again, that it is really part of a much bigger discussion.
Yeah, really well said, Michelle. I agree with everything you're saying.
Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Yeah,
It's
I join you as well.
what?
I agree as well. I'm with
I
you.
do believe it is our preparatory sessions that you're able to say things from a genuine place inside that is really meant to try and understand.
Mm-hmm.
That's really what we're here for.
Well, it's difficult to get through the fog of all of that, but it seems to me that perhaps what it boils down to, though, is whether or not um, we imagine the possibility of a kind of an ontological sense of one's gender, regardless of the sexual organs. Whether ontologically, there is a sense of being, own being, not a belief, but own being. Whether or not we can think of it as something that exists or not.
It's so subjective.
And I'm sorry.
It's such a subjective experience.
Well, yeah.
So
But there's a subjective experience that belongs to the subject.
yeah,
And
it's
and whether
living in a very confusing time.
Well, that's what I mean about the fog, that whether or not we can separate the fog and kind of consider that kind of a basic issue,
Mhm.
whether it is possible, and even if it is possible, then maybe even include it in the religious sphere, which meaning that God makes some people who have that kind of an ontological sense of themselves, their own identity. um, that becomes a religious conundrum perhaps as well, but it seems to me that that is something to grapple with.
For the second time, I'm reminded of last night I was rewatching this 6 hour, 4 hour documentary about the great comedian George Carlin, who would speak very much in terms of uh, his version of truth as opposed to being liberal or conservative. He was very true to himself, and of course, one of his early routines that ended up being leading to a Supreme Court case was the 7 words you can't say on television. And the argument basically was what makes a word an inappropriate word isn't the word itself, but it's how you use it. Were the words being delivered to an audience in order to incite a riot or violence or harm, or was it for entertainment purposes? And that makes a huge difference if you're going to arrest someone for inciting uh, something inappropriate, and so I think I was reminded by what I think Michelle was saying. What is our motivation for having this conversation today? The motivation for this conversation is not to hurt anyone or uh, you know take anyone's. I don't think it'd take anyone's rights away. Even though we don't all agree, I think we're all trying to say what we think and listen to what other people think and understand. But just like George Carlin's Seven Dirty Words, we live in an environment where there's someone listening who's going to say, no, you can't do that. This is inappropriate. This is wrong. And there's a problem with that. Our intention is not the way it is being classified by whoever it is that would make us shut this down and not even be able to say these things.
Well, Cameron, what you just said, plus I think what you had said before about the schools, and it just makes me think of the idea that there will always be a cultural slash state morality. And I say state because it does seem like the state has taken over so many aspects of culture that used to be, handled by the family or community or church, right? So that there always will be a prevailing morality. Every culture has their own prevailing morality and values. It's just a matter of what it is. And it does seem like the prevailing morality is sort of heading in the direction, and I think this is kind of what Michelle was alluding to, that certain words are not allowable, or certain conversations, can't be had, that either you fall in line as a good soldier with the current orthodoxy, or you're a heretic or apostate. I mean, in a way, it's more restrictive than even the church of old.
Right. I think
Very
that too.
Go on. Sorry.
The irony that open-minded liberal thinking can lead to an orthodoxy that's as strict as a old-fashioned religion, and it comes as now a replacement religion.
Well, they also say when there is a lack of religion, something has to fill that void. And we have a woke religion.
Mm.
And it is very hard to talk across difference because it has a religious patina to it. I also wonder how all of these very private discussions, some people are religious, some people aren't. Why has this become so public? Why can't certain things be personal? And you can also be open to hearing multiple points of view. It seems that, the gloves are off, everything's out there, and maybe everything doesn't need to be out there. There needs to be a little more tact, I think.
Yeah, I agree. I think the Victorians had it right. Some things ought to be repressed, some things ought to be behind
Mhm,
doors.
yes.
So I think I want to say kind of one thing here, which is about what's being taught to the youth, to kids. And I think Cameron was kind of alluding to this too in the schools, right? That this is just being pushed 24/7 in the schools through various children's programming, various popular shows, things like that. And it made me think of a recent experience I had. So I have worked with this issue quite a bit, with teenagers, parents, young adults, like college age, and I'm not going to really get into clinical cases, but actually somebody I know personally, she caught her son cross-dressing. This is a teenage boy. She caught him cross-dressing. And this is someone who holds all of the standard liberal positions. But as she was describing this incident to me, her reaction was basically, no. We're not doing this. You're not doing this. This is not appropriate. Like she shut it down. And then she said to me, maybe I am conservative. Maybe at the core of it, I really am conservative. And I think I found that incident quite interesting because I think ultimately a lot of parents don't want this for their children. I think that they feel a kind of gut instinct like this is not right. This is not healthy for kids ultimately.
I'm drawing back to Jack's comment that we have strong feelings about binary things, certain binary things, or black and white, as an example. And I think I always want, if I can, if I'm aware of it, I always want to turn to myself first and say, where am I coming from and why am I coming from this? And is it based on anxiety and fear and so on? I live in Tennessee. We're finishing up the legislative session next week, I hope. And it's been just filled with anti-trans bills, so on, and anti-trans legislation that has passed and so on. And I sense a lot of fear behind where that's coming from. This is a very conservative general, 75% of the legislature is Republican, 25% is Democrat. And of the Democrats, I'd say only a few are what you would call progressives. So, Tennessee is not a state of wokeness by a long shot. What I sense with all of this anti-trans legislation is it has a political use in the state of Tennessee right now. And the use is to get us to focus on things that keep us from focusing on some pretty important issues in the state, our economic issues, our healthcare issues, lots of other issues that need attention. And focusing on the trans issues I feel like has been ingenuous. It's been
Disingenuous?
disingenuous and hypocritical. Yeah. Which brings up that issue of, the public thing, the political thing, that it doesn't change my thinking about trans issues, but I think it's been put to a use.
I wonder if it's possible to make the analogy with autism. for so long, people now known as neurodivergent just made their way in life, mislabeled. A, a generation of psychiatrists, I think, apologizes for the, you're psychotic, you're retarded, you're depressed, whatever we mislabeled them. And once the word became a thing, it's now become, it's everywhere. People want their children to be called neurodivergent because they're, can get accommodations, they can get help in schools. Some people are proud of it. They want to be when they're not. So we don't have a medical treatment for it. So we have to do something, interpersonally, educationally, politically, to have people feel similar but different. I'm not sure how I'm making the connection, but it feels similar in the sense of something that didn't exist back when I was young and now is everywhere.
I was thinking of Tourette syndrome when you said that. What we used to think about folks with Tourette syndrome was what's wrong with them. Now we kind of know what's going on with Tourette syndrome, and it means it makes a big difference in how people are approached with Tourette's.
Also, the individual kind of gets washed away by all their identifications and labels, and it's very distracting. I think of analysis as being really focused on who is this individual much more than diagnoses or labels, and patients really love labels often. Like they want to have major depression, or I mean, they really want to think of themselves as this is a biological thing. This has nothing to do with my childhood or my parents or anything else. Fix me, doctor. It just seems it kind of encourages just the fragmentation of the individual into, well, I'm not a person. I'm these 8 things.
Well, it
Just a
does,
mixed bag.
like it is an identity issue. Becomes your identity, whether as a trans person or as a neurodivergent person. But the growth, the just mere growth of how many people are neurodivergent now, and it goes together with the trans too. Also, there is a lot of crossover. A lot of neurodivergent kids who don't know what's wrong will lead towards the transgender track, if you want to call it. So people are not being properly diagnosed either. I don't know that they can be.
So having a concept becomes a place of belonging.
Yes,
Yes.
very much so.
Which is really what concepts are for.
But not all things that you can identify with and belong with are good. Like the Ku Klux Klan isn't good to belong in, not to compare, but just to make an absurd logical leap.
People identify as anorexics, and people will say they feel uncomfortable with all their limbs and they want an amputation, and they do that. It's when sexuality gets involved that we get really stumped.
Brings us back to Jack's point.
Yes, exactly. Is it an innate disgust about talking about it? What is it?
somehow sexuality changed. Luba, when we were in training, it was all about psychosexuality. It seemed like everything was about libido and what makes a man and a woman, and defenses against expression of sexual desires. And then it went away. When the relational model came in, somehow, I don't know, something changed in the way we think about sexuality. And it's now become too concrete to something. It's different from the way it used to be. And maybe we need to go back there just to explore,
Mhm.
you know, the relationship between our body, the way our bodies are shaped, the way our bodies feel, and what our bodies can do, and how we experience our bodies. And the trans permutation is somewhere in there, but we don't understand it.
But so since we don't understand, of course we're getting all up in arms because we don't have the information yet. It's an emerging area of study, isn't it? I would hope so. I mean, and the fact that this came upon us so quickly, the sheer numbers. This is developed in what, 10 years like this? I mean, there always have been trans people. I'm just talking about the sheer volume and how rapidly. And our science is not caught up to it, or our understanding of working with people. Partially because I do believe that the people who run these conferences or wherever it is have shut down discourse. Good, honest, searching, grappling with this discourse. If you can't talk about it, if you're shut down, it's a problem. Even if it's hard to talk, you have to talk.
Yeah.
Is that from fear, Michelle, or something else?
From fear, what?
The discourse being shut down, is it from fear, or?
I think there is fear because people have been canceled. People have really been shamed. I had an experience of my own where, I had a different point of view about something. I don't want to go into the whole details about it, but I remembered when we had a vote, I was the only person who voted differently from everyone else in this group. And the silence that met me was so painful. I mean, we've gotten beyond that. We were able to not work it through, but talk to each other. We have relationships, but there are things that you can't talk about. And I can tell in my body how I feel when we get near. Yeah, it is fear. I do believe, in my own personal case, for sure. And I also know that I'm not an expert in all these areas, so I'm not going to be able to talk on issues about any of these things with any sense of expertise. But I don't think you need expertise to have a discussion. You just need a willingness to be open to hearing what other people are going to say. But if you feel you're going to be shot down, then you really don't talk. Protectiveness, I think.
I'm a big believer in proximity. You have to be proximal to something to know it.
Mm-hmm.
And if you can't even be proximal to something because then yeah, it makes it hard.
We're forced into these binary, are you with me or against me?
I guess we're fortunate that we're non-binary in thought.
Yeah.
Well, and notice how difficult it is to keep that curiosity, to keep that space.
Oh
So
my goodness, yes.
And being shunned by the group is like the most painful punishment. So I think the degree to which this has all become a social phenomenon, in addition to all the other levels, it's like where do people belong? And the people who feel like they don't belong anywhere, are confused about where they belong, are in a world of hurt.
Mhm.
Socrates chose execution over exile. I mean, he was offered the choice.
Wow.
Mm.
And then Navalny chose to go back to Russia after he was treated in Germany. And I'm
Mhm.
sure at some level he knew that he was choosing execution by doing that. But he chose to go back to his own country.
The other thing
Hard.
about not fitting in, when we were thinking about that, or feeling like you don't have a place, what about some kind of adaptive response when you feel you don't fit in? There's like, it's become like almost like a glorification of the oppressed. And how can you be empathic and care and balance that out and also use adaptation to get along in a difficult world? How do we find balance?
And, in terms of these social developments, I'm just wondering, is there a relationship between this becoming such a explosive issue in the aftermath of acceptance and legalization of homosexuality?
Yeah, Luba, I think they're very much linked. I think maybe even Ben Appel has talked about this, Michelle, because I haven't read his book, but I listened to some interviews with him that in the wake of gay marriage being legalized, that then a lot of those organizations they turned their attention to transgender issues because you have to have a new battle to fight in order to get donors to donate money, to bring money to the table. It's sort of like one battle won, then they kind of took on this other issue. I feel like he's the one who said that. Maybe other people have said
Well,
that.
he felt betrayed by the organization
Hmm.
because LGB people feel very.
Right.
I'm reading this from a book. I'm not an expert, but they really feel like they've lost their sense of community. It's very It's crazy. But he is very much appreciative of all that went on in terms of gay marriage, and he was an activist. He used to be an activist.
Hmm.
I mean, he writes what it was like to be at Columbia University from 2016. Was it maybe it was 2017 to 2021 or something? Fascinating.
Who are you talking about, Michelle?
His name is Ben Appel,
Okay.
and he wrote a book called Cis White Gay. And he
That
felt
same
that
guy.
it was
Okay.
people were prejudiced against him because as a white male, he had no right to say anything. That's what he felt.
Oh, got it.
And he also felt like he didn't belong anywhere. And then he went to Columbia, where he really wanted to learn about gay theory because it had meant so much, all of his activism. And what he felt was he was shut down and he couldn't talk about anything. And, this radical Islam is a big problem, and it has infected every part of the world. I probably shouldn't say that, but I said it.
Mhm.
We're opening up so many Pandora's box this morning.
Well, things become intertwined.
Yes.
Right.
And however, going back to the issue of homosexuality, it seems to me that as long as it was in the closet, it was it didn't it wasn't examined. It wasn't considered. There was no inquiry into that. Hitler decided it was degeneracy and just executed them. In it. I don't know about you, Katrina, but in Soviet Union, there was no such thing as homosexuality. I mean, who heard about this? It didn't exist, um, let alone transgender. But I think but it seems that and it is actually kind of surprising and amazing to me how this country managed to open up to homosexuality. There is so much more acceptance of that. But along with that acceptance, I think the kind of other questions come up as a result of that. What does it mean? What does it mean that you're attracted to somebody of your gender? What does it mean that you want to dress up like somebody of the other gender? What does it mean that you want to be that other gender? Then those kinds of questions open up. And yes, I mean, they can be put, and they do get put to use, maybe especially in this country for some reason, um, but they're kind of interesting questions, and seem kind of natural questions.
Well, to that point, Luba, yeah, maybe there is a place for those questions being entertained in academia, in psychoanalytic institutes. But it does seem to create havoc when it's unleashed upon wider society, upon the average person, in the average family. Maybe
Yeah, I mean, yeah, and
an
when
example of the the family that I know that I think most people don't want that for their children, and I would say it's not conducive to a functioning society to have it sort of unleashed upon the masses, to put it bluntly.
yeah, I mean, well, yes, when it comes with an agenda, it's the agenda
The
that
agendas.
becomes the problem. I mean, even in that meeting that I was sitting in and Alice was in on, it was interesting to watch. For example, there was a mother of a transgender kid that was um, describing her experience of how to get proper attention for her kid and so on. But she was I think a lot more kind of accepting, unlike your mother, of his transgender uh, experience or sort of necessity in a way. But she herself is in a gay marriage,
Mm.
and she is a gay mother so there is some kind of a more of an openness there. On the other hand, there was another young woman was there who was a sister of a transgender, and that was particularly moving in a way too, because um, her proximity to her, I guess it was a sister who was transitioning to a boy, and her sort of the pain of that family kind of the sense of that family transforming itself, transforming its own sense of constitution of how it was constituted, was so palpable, and it was so pained, and yet she was steadfast in her support and her care for her sibling. So it's on that kind of scale, on that human intimate scale, um, it is a, when it's not driven and not imposed by agenda, it is something that warrants, not just empathy, but a kind of, I don't know, a sort of allowing a sense of mystery in a way.
Thinking of Alice's oft given comment that we have to be curious.
Mhm.
And I'm opposing that to being fearful and wanting to shut down discussion or openness.
Masha, I'm sorry.
Good.
I was just, I had read a book a while ago by Masha Gessen, who is I think she's now transgender. She's no longer Masha, she's now M. Gessen. I think she's transgendered, but but her experience was, I think she came from being part of a homosexual community in Russia, and how she was bemoaning and actually naming that as a kind of uh, a sort of hallmark of a slide into fascism is the persecution of the non-gender or non-sex observing individuals, and that they get persecuted in those societies.
Yeah, Jason Stanley talks about that too.
I was just thinking that slippery slopes are real,
Mhm.
and for good and for bad. I've seen them happen in many different arenas over the course of my life. And it's, in some ways it's useful to incorporate everyone and to not have boundaries that extrude people. But on the other hand, we lose something. We're becoming a polytheistic society, maybe a pagan society. We're losing our ethical structure, our moral compass. I don't know what's good and bad and right and wrong anymore. I don't know what I should do as a clinician. If that were part of my family, I don't know what I would do. And that, we used to know it was wrong, it was hurtful, but we used to know what we believed. And, I find myself flipping back and forth all the time between too much of one belief system and too much of anything goes if it feels right.
Right. That's why you need to get knowledgeable on many different facets. Like I just read this book, this Ben Appel book. I would love to read another book on the other side of it to get a more balanced view of it. He's very opinionated and his experience, and it's a very moving book. But of course, someone else has a very different experience. And I think it is only through being open to different facets of a complex issue to have any ability to really, have a meaningful discussion about it, aside of one's emotions. And I think emotions take over in a lot of these discussions.
Okay, I'll make a leap to another crazy charged topic. Is the end point of this sexual slippery slope what happens with pedophilia?
Mhm.
What happens if you can't help being sexually attracted to children?
Well, the push is to normalize pedophilia. even using the acronym MAP, minor attracted person.
About, yeah.
Yeah, it's a very disturbing trend.
But I don't know. On the other hand, there are minor attracted persons, also known as pedophiles, and there are countries in Europe where they have, televised ad campaigns speaking to pedophiles, saying, if you have these thoughts, you need to get help. You need to see a doctor. You don't have to commit crimes. You don't have to hurt people. Come in, get help. Like whatever, but don't do anything to hurt anyone. And I think that's a much better approach to dealing. I mean, it's just a fact that a certain amount of the population are pedophiles. And so what are we going to do? I mean, if we just shame them and call them names and that's not going to help. That's what we've been doing. And so I don't know, my alarm bells aren't going off for that one. I mean, I don't think normalizing it, I mean, you're talking about like normalizing it like it's okay. And I think the president would say, well, they've been doing it for millions of years. So, I mean, sorry, I'm getting, that was a different topic. Uh, we don't want to normalize it, but we want to have, again, like individual human beings doing their best to understand. But is it a slippery slope? I don't know. Maybe I would say there are other slippery slopes that are more like I think polyamory is a slippery slope. The ubiquity of porn is a slippery slope. There's a lot of things that are already happening that we don't talk about. Like,
Social
what do
media.
you, what do you do when you have a patient who's polyamorous and miserable and trying to figure out what's getting in the way of having a good, you know, a good enough object, speaking psychoanalytically, to attach to, and they're like, "Oh no, I'm polyamorous, and how dare you criticize my identity as a polyamorous person?" Is that totally normalized now too? It kind of is, for better or worse. I'd say probably for worse, really.
I mean, there does seem to be this underlying fear that if we let ourselves go, we're going to turn into kind of wild animals. So the slippery slope, I think, speaks to this fear that if the boundaries of religion and culture descend, will descend into barbarity. But that's also a rationalization for limiting behaviors that might be adaptive and that might be satisfying without victims, without power dynamics, which is definitely the case in some of the things you're talking about, Cameron. And I think, socially, politically, we need to look at who, when a society finds people to scapegoat or to call out, that should be a red flag.
What's that a red flag to, Jack? Amplify that, please, a little bit.
Well, the dynamics of scapegoating in any society is in a way to sort of externalize the aggression and as a way to distract from other things or to not be able to manage aggression. So, you know, for a long time it's immigrants, now it's trans folks. And while there are valid concerns about the issues around both of those communities, I think the inability to have a nuanced conversation about it is an irrational way, I think, for the culture to distract.
Would it be fair to say, though, that our culture has, even conservative culture, has come a long way in accepting homosexuality, bisexuality, maybe even transgender? I mean, I don't know. But I mean, even the fact that it is talked about, like, has it come a long way, even conservative elements of our society? I mean, we're not doing what they did in Russia, and what's happened in Islamic countries is not happening here. We're having these conversations, kind of.
By the way, in Iran, uh, my friend was telling me that transgender is considered a medical problem that's treated by hormones and surgery and paid for by insurance. Homosexuality is behavioral and it's a crime.
That's what this book talked about.
Mhm.
There's a lot of well, Iranians that are here who are gay are grateful that they have. I mean, when you're surgically altering yourself, there's so many medical problems for the rest of your life. One with loss of fertility, loss of sexual function. I mean, people are, there are risks to anything. I mean, this is really surgical mutilation in many cases. I mean, so the stakes are high. If somebody they're talking about who they want to love. You're not doing anything to your body. If somebody is attracted, same-sex attraction, that's different than having to alter your body. But the thing about Iran and the fact that it's medical, and there are a lot of people who have had sex change operations for that reason.
Well, it sounds like they have more extensive insurance in Iran than we do in the US,
Yeah.
which was really surprising.
Maybe that's
Indeed.
not a bad thing. So where do we go from here? I mean, maybe we can spend the next 5 minutes thinking about what happened today and what new questions would come up for another meeting in a couple months.
So one thing, Michelle, that you said that was interesting, I don't exactly remember how you said it, but sort of like there's a desire, I guess, on the part of what I would name as the left, to defend all oppressed people and put all the oppressed people in one bucket, one category. Is that what you were saying?
I was talking about it as a glorification of oppression.
Oh, okay. Glorification.
Like, yes, I'm transgender. I am neurodivergent. The disability is interesting also because I have an interest in the disability community, and the disability community is very, very progressive now also. I'll read these books and I'll identify with a lot of what they're saying since I have a chronic illness, but they're always so far to the left of where I am that I'm saying, oh, this person has so much in common with me. And yet that divide is there, and it hits an emotional place very strongly.
I think we've only scratched the surface of the conversations we could have together.
That's all we can do.
Yeah.
I mean,
I
I'm
love the
very,
fact that we can listen to each other and just
I'm very sympathetic to the sense that there's not a shared ethics in the country that for some religion provides, and I understand that's an important thing, but I just see it in a different way. I think I'm struggling with is there a way to share a morality and ethics that is a lot more non-binary or complex. And I think my own experience with religions has given me some skepticism in terms of whether religions actually practice the ethics that they profess. So, that's my own struggle, my own question.
Whereas my struggle is when the side I agree with, which tends to be progressive, starts to become its own social activist religion, and makes me recoil from that.
Mhm.
Yeah, I like that word polytheism, Alice, that you introduced. Yeah, I think that there's something to it. We have too many gods right now, and perhaps no one unifying God, quote unquote, but no one unifying morality slash ethics, which sounds like a lot of us agree on. And then I think the second part, kind of talking about the sex change operations in Iran, and and the rise of identity and oppression and disability, I guess then brought me back to, I guess we mostly talked about this in the email, but about capitalism and Nick Land and his ideas that essentially all of these aspects of human experience, including sexuality, are now kind of ruthlessly exploited by the market. If it can be bought or sold, like even what Alice was saying about, used to be teenage girls would get nose jobs, now they get their breasts removed, right? I mean, people are making money off of that. Like if somebody can make $1 off of it, it's going to happen, no matter how disturbing or horrific that thing is.
Mm.
Yeah, money is another god.
Yes, it should.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
Maybe something about morality, ethics. God, do we need God even if we're not religious? Is there something that our species needs that's transcendent? And are we losing that? I don't know how to formulate that into a question, but it seems like that's in the air.
What is Western civilization? How do we protect it? Do we protect it?
That's a good one.
That's right. Yeah.
Yeah, I like
Yeah.
that one, Cameron.
Yeah.
I'm thinking that a lot of the heroes that were my heroes of the 20th century, Gandhi and Dr. King and Reverend Lawson, found common ground in their Christianity, Hinduism, Buddhism.
Yeah. All right, so let's continue this on email. And
That's
look
good.
forward to another one. It's very, very interesting. It feels like a process is happening.
It does. It really,
Yeah,
very
doesn't it?
grateful to be part of this group.
Yeah,
And
me
hopefully,
too. Me too.
hopefully the planet will still be here for our next meeting.
You're right.
Oh, yes, that's also
Okay, bye, everybody.
Bye.
take
See
care.
you all today.
Like